Good morning. It's time for another week of Garden Wise Adventures. Today, I would love to talk about edibles in the landscapes. I'm going to concentrate on that this week. I've got several interviews set up with some wonderful people who do use edibles in their landscapes. Now, I know there are some zoning laws that forbid the use of edibles in the landscapes, but if you're really careful, you can sometimes get past those. Now, I'm not suggesting to be illegal. Be wise, make your gardens beautiful, don't be annoying to the neighbors. And let's look at what you can put in your landscape that will look beautiful and be useful. As you've seen in my garden tours, I use quite a bit of edibles in my landscape. I don't go to the point of having a food forest, although I sometimes consider part of my yard a food forest, and it is still beautiful and useful. Let's talk about fruit trees. There are several different fruit trees and fruiting shrubs that you can use in your landscape that are not only beautiful, but they are useful. You can keep them pruned shorter if you don't have enough room for them, but keep them attractive. Keep up with the pruning. Don't put fruit in your landscape that you're not going to be able to keep up with. My little dapple dandy right here, I have in my backyard, and I think he's cute, but he may not be appropriate for some areas of the yard if you need a cleaner looking landscape. My jujube tree, on the other hand, is a gorgeous tree and is an excellent landscape tree that is very useful. The fruit can be harvested all at once. When it gets totally ripe, you can actually shake the tree and most of the fruit will fall out. So you don't have too much of a mess. Don't put it over a sidewalk though, because the fruit is hard and it could constitute a trip hazard. The service berries, they come in trees and shrubs and make a fantastic usable landscape plant. I did another video on service berries and also one on jujubes. You can go watch those and kind of see the size that they get, the different varieties that there are. Definitely use them in Utah landscapes. The other thing that I love to use is herbs. There are some herbs that are a little bit wild, so you may need to keep them under control, and others that are really tame. The sages, this is a purple sage. Sages make absolutely gorgeous landscape plants in the state of Utah. They don't die back too much in the winter. They don't require maintenance, really, other than cutting out the parts that have died in the winter. They can take drought conditions. This one is right next to my lawn. It's taking the lawn water. So they are perfect shrubs for landscape use. These wild looking animals here are oregano. They're flowering at this time, and I will be cutting them back after the pollinators are done with them. The pollinators absolutely love them, and it's in my backyard, and so I can let them flower. And they are still beautiful, I think. If you wanted to keep them in your front yard, they make a great low ground cover. They do take over a lot, so you do have to be careful with that. If you don't want them to have this wild look, as soon as the flowers start to appear, you can shear them back and just have the leaves and have a tidier looking plant. This is Bergarten sage, which I think is one of the most attractive sages out there. It's edible. You can use it just the same way as you would the regular garden sage, but it does not really even die back that much in the winter. So it is an absolutely gorgeous landscape plant, and it covers a lot of area and acts actually as a really good ground cover. Another pretty one that I don't see utilized that often is winter savory. There's summer savory, which is an annual, and winter savory. Winter savory is just a beautiful little shrub. It only requires being cut back in the spring. I cut it back by about half because the top part dies out. And as you can see, all sorts of interesting pollinators really love this shrub. So it's a great shrub to have in the landscape. Another beautiful herb is chives. They have gorgeous purple flowers in the spring. And then the rest of the year, they'll sporadically flower if you cut them back. And they have these really cute strappy leaves. You can go out and harvest them and have an oniony flavored landscape plant to use in your cooking. Now, if you use the right variety and put it in a little bit of a protected place in the winter, the right variety is actually an ARP. You can use rosemary in your landscape. In my opinion, coming from Southern California, there is no prettier plant than a rosemary in the landscape. This one is approximately 10 years old. It did have one winter where it died back by 2/3. But one trick that I have found is I will use what's called layering. When you layer a plant, you take the underside of one of these branches, take a younger branch. Take a younger branch like this one. Scrape the bark off of it a little bit. Don't scrape it too bad. But what you want to do is expose the cambium layer underneath and then staple it to the ground. Cover it up with dirt. And after a while, that area will grow roots. And I've done this to this shrub, so it's rooted in the ground in about 5 different places. So if the main part of the plant dies, hopefully one of those rooted areas will survive and you can continue having this plant. Another thing you could do with that layering is you can propagate your rosemary very easily. So wait a season until it's rooted. Once you've layered it into the ground like that, you can remove, cut off the connection to the mother plant very carefully with a large area, dig up a large area for the root ball and transplant it somewhere else in your yard. Another pretty herb to use in the landscapes is lovage. I'm going to do a video one of these days on lovage and the care of it. They can get a little gangly and they do require more moisture than some herbs. So if you have a moist place with a little bit of shade where you don't mind if it gets a little bit wild, this can also be a gorgeous landscape plant. As does our beautiful bee balm. Bee balms are another one that will grow quite tall. And they are actually sold as a landscape plant, but you can make tea out of them. They are an edible medicinal plant. Another gorgeous plant in the landscape are grapevines. They make wonderful addition to a fence line. I've used them all along my fence line for privacy barrier. I wanted a fence line that would go right up against the sidewalk, but to do that in this neighborhood, it had to be a slatted fence and it had to be under 4 feet tall. So I just planted grapes. Now I will do another video on grapes, but you have to be careful. Do not put your grapes on top of your fences. As you can see, I put T-posts in and wire to train the grapes along. That way the wire and the T-posts take the weight of the grapes and it doesn't tear down your fence. One of the more underrated edibles in landscapes are the wonderful strawberry plants. I don't see too many people using them as landscape plants, but as I back up, I'll show you that these strawberries make a gorgeous ground cover in my landscape. They still fruit. You can see the fruits down here. So you can harvest them. The leaves turn red in the fall, so you get all season long interest. And nobody's going to complain about strawberries in the landscape like that. Now I've done other videos on my medlar and my pawpaw. These are some unusual fruit trees that if you looked at them and didn't know what they were, you would never know that these are edibles in the landscape. But they make absolutely fantastic landscape plants. Their size works really well. They fruit really well. I'm just worried that if people figure out what my pawpaw is, my fruit are so few and far between that I don't want anybody coming and helping themselves. Shh, don't tell anybody. Don't tell anybody that they're edible and what they are. And hopefully I'll be able to keep my fruit. I don't mind if people come and take my medlars though. So anyway, medlars and pawpaws, if you can get them to grow in your area, pawpaws and medlars make fantastic edible landscape plants. Now, if you have areas of your landscape where you like to put annuals and they have the right conditions such as full sun, a good amount of water, and good soil fertility, you can put stuff like this beautiful purple Ruffles basil. I love putting basil in my front yard. That's one of the staple annuals that I put in my yard. It goes beautiful with my Glow Girl spirea, with the purple and the yellow together. Also my variegated iris. I'm going to have some mums blooming close by. They're absolutely gorgeous, and it thrives in this area because it does get lawn water and full sun, and I don't have to mess with it. Plus, you have the basil that you can use in your meals. Now I have one other spot in my landscape that this year has edibles that doesn't usually have edibles. This is my pot up front. I had planted some alyssum and some calabatroa and petunias, and in the middle I put this beautiful pineapple sage, plus my very, very favorite lemon verbena. As I've said before, I come from California, and I had a lemon verbena tree, and I was missing it so much that I just put it in the pot this year. Now, the pineapple sage has outgrown everything, and I have not ever really gotten it to flower, and I'm not sure why. Maybe it just gets a little too much shade here. But anyway, you can add edibles to your pots and have edibles in your landscape. That's another way to do it. I plant a fair amount of edibles in my landscape, but nowhere near the amount as some of the people that I'm going to interview this month. I am really excited about some of the interviews that I'm going to be doing, and I'm going to be able to show you some fantastic landscapes where they're mostly edibles, but you would not know by looking at it. We're also going to talk about permaculture and what that means. We're going to talk about food forests maybe a little bit, and just kind of explore more about edibles in the landscape. I would love to hear your experiences planting edibles in your landscape. What are your zoning laws? Have you been able to find a way around them legally without complaints? I don't want to hear about the wild jungle, I don't weed it because I don't have to type comments. I want to know actual landscapes that can please your neighbors and be edible. So anyway, I'm excited for this month's series on edible landscapes, and go have a wonderful garden adventure.